Honestly, at this point, I should just make a whole YouTube channel dedicated to responding to Trent Horn videos. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Majesty of Reason. I'm Joe Schmid, and today I'm responding to Trent Horn's video, Why Atheists Can't Blame Christians for Anything. If you're curious, I have a whole playlist of response videos, included in which are all of my response videos to Trent Horn. I've responded in tremendous depth to his cases for God's existence, his responses to the problem of evil, and much more. Link to that is in the description, and hopefully it should be popping up in the corner right now. Today, though, I'll be explaining why he's mistaken about atheism precluding moral responsibility. Oh, and about the title of this video, I can hear some of you foaming at the mouth right now. Calm down. YouTubers need clicks, okay? Trent Horn knows that I deeply appreciate him and have benefited from our very friendly interactions. So yeah, getting that out of the way. And before going on, here's how I'm going to be using some of these important terms. First, free will, in the broad sense, is here going to be understood as the ability to control our actions in a way needed to be morally responsible for them. Leeway freedom is the ability to do otherwise. In other words, on a given occasion of acting, an agent with leeway freedom has the ability to take each of two or more incompatible courses of action. Determinism is the thesis that everything that occurs is an inevitable consequence of prior conditions. Those conditions might be the past together with the laws of nature, as in physical determinism. Those conditions might be divine decrees or God's will, as in theological determinism, and there are other versions of determinism as well. But with all that out of the way, let's get on to Trent's video.
Atheists like to blame Christians for all kinds of bad things, but there's a contradiction in their condemnations that actually provides evidence in favor of Christianity. Consider Alex O'Connor's interview last month with William Lane Craig, where the two discuss the Old Testament's references to God commanding Israel to kill the men, women, and children among the surrounding Canaanites. Alex is sympathetic to the idea that defending this divine command is morally repugnant.
You must understand how that sounds, saying it was a blessing for these children to be killed and go to God. I mean, this is something that Dawkins quotes you on directly, and I'm interested in you share my assessment here that even if he's not correct, I can understand why he would hear you say something like that and think that it's morally repugnant, that it's revolting.
And here's Richard Dawkins expressing the same opinion.
I feel such contempt for him because of his, I don't know whether you've seen what he says about the Israelites slaughtering the Midianites. And
Sam Harris makes similar moral accusations against Craig in his debate with him.
Whatever he commands is good. So when he commands that the Israelites to slaughter the Amalekites, that behavior becomes intrinsically good because he commanded it. Okay, well, here we're being offered, I'm glad he raised the issue of psychopathy, we're being offered a psychopathic and psychotic moral attitude.
Alex, Richard Dawkins, and many other atheists seem to think Christians who defend the unrestricted killing of the Canaanites in the Old Testament are doing something morally blameworthy in making that defense. I'm not going to respond to that specific issue in the Bible in this episode. I'll include links in the description where I and other Catholic apologists have responded to these difficult texts in the Old Testament. What I'm more concerned about in today's episode is reconciling many atheists' moral disgust toward Christians who defend that doctrine or the doctrine of hell or the wrongness of homosexuality. Their disgust towards Christians defending what they consider to be indefensible, and those same atheists denying that we have free will. Their reaction to Christians implies they're angry Christians would do something that a rational person should not do. They might think that someone as smart as William Lane Craig should have used his brain to not believe such, in their eyes, absurd things, and so Craig can be morally blamed for his choice to defend these beliefs.
There's an important question here that I think we should ask. Are these atheists morally blaming William Lane Craig and other Christians? That's one way to interpret them, but it certainly isn't the only way, and this points to an important flaw in Trent's video. Expressions of these attitudes, of resentment, indignation, of castigating and reprimanding someone, etc., have many different social functions, many of which simply don't involve any moral blame directed towards the targets of those attitudes. We very often feel resentment and indignation towards, and castigate and reprimand very young children, animals, and mentally handicapped people, despite knowing that they are not morally blameworthy for what they do. And this doesn't make these attitudes unjustified or inappropriate in these cases, since these attitudes have a variety of legitimate social functions, only some of which involve ascribing moral blame. These attitudes can instead be perfectly appropriately used to modulate the behavior of others, to express one's own commitments and beliefs and values, and much more besides. If this is correct, then the atheists Trent quotes at the beginning aren't being inconsistent at all with their atheism, even if atheism implies the absence of moral responsibility. The appropriateness of expressing or conveying the aforementioned attitudes does not imply the presence of moral responsibility, and hence one can consistently express or convey these attitudes without believing in moral responsibility. This is a key flaw in the guiding idea behind Trent's video. His whole point is that these atheists at the beginning cannot consistently do what they're doing, since atheism allegedly entails, according to Trent, the absence of moral responsibility. But even granting Trent his mistaken claim that this entailment holds, and more on that anon, Trent is just wrong that this renders these atheists inconsistent.
An atheist might say William Lane Craig should be better. But the assumption one should be better implies that one could have acted differently, acted better than one had already done.
So first, Trent's claim here is just asserted. It's quite philosophically controversial, too, and so mere assertion won't cut it here. Second, there are, by my lights, quite plausible counterexamples to Trent's claim. That is, cases in which one should perform some action phi, but nevertheless could not have acted differently. That is, could not have failed to phi. Suppose you're mountain climbing alone in a deserted area and become trapped in a crevice by a large, unmovable boulder that is pinning your arm down. To make it out alive, you need to use the axe on your belt to hack off your arm and free yourself. You recognize that this is in your best interest, that it would be incredibly good if you did it, and incredibly bad if you didn't, since you'd leave behind a wife, several young kids, grad students, and many others whom you serve. And suppose that these recognitions, together with your survival instinct, compel you to hack off your arm, such that you genuinely couldn't do anything but hacking off your arm in these circumstances. It seems obvious to me that you still did what you should have done, even though you could not have acted differently. If that's right, then Trent is simply mistaken to say that if you should phi, then it follows that you could have acted differently. Or consider a mom who has just given birth and psychologically hardwired in such a way that she can't help but care for her newborn. Even still, it seems obvious to me that she should care for her newborn. Or consider Nomi Arpali's case in her book Merit, Meaning, and Human Bondage. Suppose you step on the brakes to avoid hitting a pedestrian. In doing so, it seems you're responding to overwhelming prudential and moral reasons. And suppose further that given your psychological and physical constitution, you just had to attend to these reasons and they were just totally decisive and compelling to you, and so you couldn't do otherwise. According to Arpali, you were pushed to action by the very fact that you have these overwhelming reasons. Yet we do not deny that you ought morally and prudentially to step on your brakes in this case. Yet again, it's another case in which plausibly someone should phi, even though they had no genuine alternative to phying. And moreover, any Frankfurt case will do here, but we'll get to those later because Trent covers them.
Even if the claim be better is only an exhortation to change the future, to be better in future behavior, that assumes one has the power to change the future and decide what he or she will do.
Yes, it assumes that one has the power to influence the future by one's actions, but that doesn't require leeway freedom. It is precisely through our actions that, under determinism, the future takes the shape that it does. Determinism doesn't render us powerless over the future course of events. It doesn't render us somehow unable to influence the future. We still influence the future by our choices, even if determinism is true.
But this seems to contradict another common atheistic idea, that we do not have free will, and so we are determined to do what we did, and we are not free to do otherwise.
So Trent here is characterizing the view that we don't have free will, and so we are determined to do what we do, and we're not to do otherwise. But first, Trent should be, I think, much more careful in his language here, since his statement appears to suggest that determinism follows from a lack of free will. That's usually what you say when you say, we don't have free will, and so we are determined to do what we did. That "and so" is signaling that the latter thing follows from the former thing. Trent seems to be implying or suggesting that determinism follows from a lack of free will. But of course, that isn't so. It's logically possible that we lack free will, even in an indeterministic world populated with lots of quantum randomness, say. And I think Trent would agree with this point, and so would probably agree that he was being incautious or uncareful with his language. Second, and more importantly, I think Trent should be much more careful with his use of the notoriously slippery term free will. Does he mean free will in the broad sense that I defined earlier, namely the ability to control our actions in a way needed to be morally responsible for them? Does he mean leeway freedom? And these distinctions are important because they lead to different questions about their relation with determinism. We can ask, is free will in the broad sense compatible with determinism? We can also ask, is leeway freedom compatible with determinism? And we can ask, is leeway freedom required for free will in the broad sense? These are different questions, and they should be carefully distinguished. But either way, whether Trent means free will in the broad sense or leeway freedom specifically, he seems to be assuming that determinism removes both leeway freedom and source of freedom. And I note here that this can't be assumed, it's not obvious, and it's monumentally philosophically controversial. But as I say here, maybe he'll be offering an argument for that, so let's see. Let's move on to the later portions of the video.
Alex has made several videos arguing that we don't have free will, and he's sympathetic to Robert Sapolsky's claims that if free will does not exist, then we do not have moral responsibility. At the end of Sapolsky's book, Determined, A Science of Life Without Free Will, he writes, "We need to accept the absurdity of hating any person for anything they've done. Ultimately, that hatred is sadder than hating the sky for storming, hating the earth when it quakes, hating a virus because it's good at getting into lung cells. This is where science has brought us."
Okay, so I had to interject here with a brief note on Sapolsky's book, because I couldn't help myself. Sapolsky's book has been roundly criticized for its lack of philosophical depth, its entirely baseless assumptions, its ignorance, indeed total neglect of the wealth of literature published on the topics he's covering, and many more serious problems besides. See, for example, John Martin Fisher's scathing and spot-on review of the book here. Also see my review of the Sapolsky humor debate on free will with Taylor Sear, relatively recent video on my channel, and I also have a free will playlist in which that video with Taylor Sear is included, so check out that playlist and check out my playlists more generally. Folks, they're the best, believe me, folks, they're so great.
And in his book on free will, Sam Harris writes, "Viewing human beings as natural phenomena need not damage our system of criminal justice. If we could incarcerate earthquakes and hurricanes for their crimes, we would build prisons for them as well. Punishing people purely for pragmatic reasons would be very different from the approach that we currently take." My claim is that atheists can only blame Christians and thus hold Christians morally responsible for their beliefs if atheists believe in free will. But free will for many atheists cannot exist in a godless universe. But this just gives us a reason to abandon atheism, not free will. An argument on the matter might go like this: if God does not exist, we do not have moral responsibility. We do have moral responsibility, therefore God does exist.
All right, so Trent here has given a core argument for God's existence from moral responsibility. If God doesn't exist, then we don't have moral responsibility, but we do have moral responsibility, and so God exists. As I say here, premise one is just false. Nearly every model of moral responsibility, both compatibilist and incompatibilist, is compatible with atheism. Reasons responsiveness, mesh theories, event causal libertarian theories, agent causal libertarian theories, non-causal theories, etc. Nothing in the mere denial of God's existence prevents you from being able to accept one of these accounts. As for premise two, I tend to think that premise two is true, that we do indeed have moral responsibility, but I admit that pretty much my only justification for that is that it seems obvious to me, and I don't have sufficiently powerful defeaters for that seeming. I fully grant that this appeal to intellectual seemings won't be persuasive for those who lack the relevant seemings or for those who have sufficiently powerful defeaters for it. At least sufficiently powerful defeaters for which there are no additional defeaters.
Let's define moral responsibility. This means an agent can be praised or blamed for an action.
So Trent here says that moral responsibility means that an agent can be blamed or praised for an action, but we should add here a condition that the blame or praise is deserved. And maybe also that the blame or praise is appropriate or fitting or justified or reasonable or something like that. And just a little clarificatory note, when an agent deserves blame, there's reason to blame them simply because they did wrong. Moral responsibility is not merely a matter of the possibility that an agent is blamed or praised. I mean, after all, it's possible to blame or praise an 8-month-old. But that doesn't mean that they're actually morally responsible. And that's because that blame or praise isn't deserved. So you need to add a condition, something along the lines of that the blame or praise is deserved. And again, maybe also that the blame or praise is appropriate or fitting or something like that.
If a lightning bolt burns down a house, the lightning cannot be blamed or praised. It has no moral responsibility. But if an arsonist burns down a house, he can be blamed. But what is the root of the blame? It can't just be in physical causation. A lightning bolt may be physically responsible for a house burning down because it was the physical cause of the fire. If the bolt had not struck, the house would probably still be standing. But the lightning bolt is not morally responsible. In some cases, human beings are physically responsible for harm, but they are not morally responsible. For example, if you try to put out a grease fire with water, you'll just spread the fire. If someone burned down their house this way, they're not morally responsible for the fire. It was an accident. Or at least their carelessness makes them less morally responsible than an arsonist who deliberately burns down a house. Both this person and the arsonist are physically responsible for the fire, but only the arsonist is fully morally responsible. But why is that? An atheist might say it's because the arsonist wanted to burn the house down, whereas the lightning bolt or the accidental fire starter did not have that want. It's our desires that determine our moral responsibilities.
So just a quick note that desire-based theories are considerably more sophisticated than this, and often appeal to a kind of mesh or harmony between first-order desires and second-order desires. I'm not going to get into the details of that, but I just wanted to note that this is almost a monstrous simplification and should be flagged as such.
But what determines our desires? Most atheists would say that if the arsonist had a brain tumor that caused him to want to burn things down, he would not be morally responsible. But what's the difference between being determined to act by a brain tumor and being determined to act simply by other chemicals in the brain? In both cases, you are determined to do something by physical forces.
So, for starters, atheists are clearly not committed to thinking that we are determined to act simply by chemicals in the brain. The atheist can easily believe that our recognition of reasons, and not just microchemical goings-on in the brain, plays a role in determining our behavior. Atheists are not committed to reductive materialism or reductive physicalism. They can be non-reductive physicalists. They can be property dualists, substance dualists, neutral monists, panpsychists, hylomorphists or hylomorphic dualists, etc. In light of this, the atheist need not grant Trent's implicit framing that under atheism we are determined to act simply by chemicals in the brain. But in any case, to answer Trent's question about the difference between an ordinary determined agent and an agent determined by a brain tumor, here are at least two relevant differences. First, suppose we're realists about biological function. According to realism about biological function, some biological systems have certain objective functions, that is, functions that don't derive from anyone's goals or attitudes or desires. For instance, biological realists typically believe that the function of the heart is to pump blood, that the function of the lungs is gas exchange, and so on. If we take this view, then there's a very important and plausibly responsibility-relevant difference between these agents. That is, a difference between them that seems relevant to their moral responsibility. Namely, the ordinary agent's neural and cognitive systems are functioning properly, whereas the proper functioning of those systems is significantly impeded in the case of the agent with a tumor. And note that nothing in atheism, moreover, rules out biological systems having objective functions. In other words, realism about biological function is perfectly compatible with atheism. So that's one relevant difference. Here's a second relevant difference between the agents. The ordinary agent, unlike typical agents with serious brain tumors affecting their behavior, is appropriately responsive to reasons and can modulate their behavior in light of their sensitivity to those reasons. That's an important difference to them that very much seems relevant to moral responsibility.
And if you say understanding reasons is what makes us morally responsible, that doesn't avoid the problem, because our understanding of reasons is as fated as our actions under determinism.
I just said here, what? Trent, you were asking for a responsibility-relevant difference between an ordinary determined agent and an agent whose actions are determined by a brain tumor. An important kind of reasons responsiveness is a difference between these agents, and it seems clearly relevant to moral responsibility. So, for example, a lack of sensitivity to the domain of reasons and an inability to modulate one's behavior in light of those reasons is partly why we don't regard animals and babies as morally responsible agents. Nothing that Trent says here challenges the response that this is a responsibility-relevant difference between these agents. Trent has simply said that the ordinary determined agent who is appropriately reasons responsive is still determined. Yes, that's true. But so what? We're already granting that both agents are determined. The question is whether there's nevertheless a responsibility-relevant difference between them, even though they're both determined. I've just pinpointed one such responsibility-relevant difference between the determined agents. And Trent's response is just to reiterate that, but they're still determined. That is obviously a non-response. And moreover, unless we already presuppose that being determined removes free will or moral responsibility, Trent's point here seems entirely moot, and so Trent is simply begging the very question at issue. After all, if being determined does not by itself remove free will / moral responsibility, then Trent noting that the reason's responsive agent is still determined doesn't suffice to show that this agent is not morally responsible. So, in addition to offering a total non-response, Trent has simply begged the very question at issue.
So what explains why the healthy arsonist is morally blameworthy, but the lightning bolt, the accidental fire starter, and the brain tumor arsonist are not morally guilty or responsible? The answer is that the first three could not have done otherwise. They were just following various laws of nature. There was no point where they could have freely chosen to not start the fire given their circumstances. The lightning bolt had to strike, the accident was going to happen, and the tumor was going to cause someone to start a fire. There was no other way it could have ended.
So, first, don't forget that Trent has entirely failed to refute the two plausibly responsibility-relevant differences that I pointed above, one about proper function and the other one about reasons responsiveness. In fact, he hasn't even given a single good reason against these candidate responsibility-relevant differences. Consequently, atheists have absolutely nothing to worry about in Trent's video. Key steps in his argument fail, and I could end my video here. Second, Trent's answer here can't be the sole answer, since if the lightning were somehow indeterministic, and hence could have done something differently than it in fact did, such as not striking a house as opposed to striking a house, it wouldn't thereby be morally responsible. And this tells us that the ability to do otherwise is not by itself a sufficient answer. But again, Trent's point is probably just that, at least according to Trent, it's necessary.
But the healthy arsonist could have stopped what he was doing. He could have chosen to do otherwise.
But why should we accept that? Many compatibilists who accept the truth of determinism simply reject it, and so it can't simply be asserted. I'm not saying that there are no reasons for thinking that it's the case. My point is just that we at least need to be offered such reasons. Notice also that Trent is setting up a dichotomy between actions that are determined and actions that are such that one could have done otherwise. In doing so, Trent is assuming that determinism precludes leeway freedom, or in other words, that determinism is incompatible with leeway freedom. But first, Trent offers no justification for this assumption. And second, it's very controversial and not immediately obvious. And so again, it can't simply be assumed. And some compatibilists, notably Leeway compatibilists, have challenged this, so consider Kadri Viveland's new dispositionalism. One way to get your mind into the kind of space here is to see that determinism plausibly doesn't remove dispositions. So suppose that our world is deterministic, and some glass vase is created, but then placed in a safe place for the rest of its existence, so that it never breaks. Intuitively, this vase is still fragile. It's still able to break, or disposed to break, even if it never, in fact, breaks. And again, this is true even if determinism holds. And this plausibly shows that one can have an ability to be or do otherwise, even in a deterministic world. If so, then Trent would be mistaken that determinism removes our ability to do otherwise. Again, I'm just kind of presenting the kind of guiding idea, or the core idea behind, or at least one guiding idea, or one motivation behind this sort of new dispositionalist approach. In order for Trent's argument to succeed, he would have to rule this out, and yet he does no such thing. And a little bit more on Viveland's view here. For Viveland, abilities to do otherwise are to be characterized in terms of intrinsic dispositions. That is, dispositions of agents that consist in intrinsic properties, by contrast with extrinsic or relational properties that agents have. And because the essential features of such intrinsic dispositions aren't analyzed conditionally, like we aren't just analyzing dispositions in terms of conditionals, like if the glass were struck, then it would break. Under this sort of view, we're not sort of reducing dispositions to merely satisfying these sorts of conditionals. Because of that, her view is actually immune to standard assaults on classical Leeway compatibilists' conditional analyses of of the ability to do otherwise. But alas, that's a topic for another day that we're not going to get into here. I just want to put this on your guys' radar. Namely, that Trent is setting up a dichotomy between actions that are determined and actions that are such that one could have done otherwise. And so he's assuming that determinism is incompatible with leeway freedom. But Trent offers no justification for that assumption. It's very controversial, and people have offered some prima facie reasonable pushbacks against it. For instance, quadrivivalent and this new dispositionalism that I've just mentioned. But let's get back to Trent's video.
And the fact that he did not do that means he can be held morally responsible for his actions and not just physically responsible. But if atheism is true, then human beings are no different than anything else that is engaged in physical causal interactions in the universe. They're all just molecules in motion that are determined to act by other molecules and forces around them.
Oh, goodness. Okay, I'm once again asking apologists to stop pretending that atheism is the same thing as, or implies, reductive physicalism. I mean, come on, Trent. This is Frank Turek level. I mean, do better. I am once again asking for your monetary support. I am once again asking apologists to stop pretending that atheism is reductive physicalism. To more directly respond to Trent's claim, no. Atheism does not imply that we are just molecules in motion. Atheism is perfectly compatible with property dualism, with hylomorphism, with substance dualism, with neutral monism, with panpsychism, with non-reductive physicalism, and so on. This also means that atheists need not afford molecules the only role in influencing or explaining our behavior. Our behavior can also be influenced by our recognition of reasons, for instance. Atheists can also believe that certain biological systems, such as the brains of rational organisms, have irreducible top-down causal powers, which allows that their behavior is not just the result of molecules bashing into one another at the microchemical level.
If you don't morally blame animal or material collections of molecules for the harm that they cause, on what basis can you morally blame human collections of molecules for the harms that they cause?
Oh boy, so this is why I made a Common Mistakes series. I'm going to play mistake number 112 because Trent Horn is making this very mistake. On to mistake number 112. Non-theistic accounts can't explain why human morality is different from animal behavior, and so they're arbitrary in applying morality to human behavior but not animal behavior. More precisely, such accounts can't offer an explanation for why we appropriately blame, praise, hold accountable, punish, etc. humans for their behavior, but not, for example, chimpanzees. Okay, I think this is a mistake. As I say here, this is just wrong. There are pretty compelling non-theistic explanations for why human morality is different from the social behavior of animals. The question here is, why do we appropriately blame, praise, hold accountable, punish, etc. humans for their behavior, but not chimpanzees? Well, the explanation is that humans have various morally relevant intrinsic features that non-human animals lack. In particular, humans have the capacity to understand, deliberate on, act upon, and regulate their behavior in light of reasons. Animals aren't sensitive to the range of reasons bearing on their actions, and this explains at least in large part why they aren't morally culpable for their actions. They can't be held accountable since they can't be privy to the range of specifically moral reasons counting for or against their actions. But humans are different, right? We have various intrinsic rational capacities, like capacities to apprehend and base our actions on reasons. This means that we're liable to praise and blame if we act for bad reasons or overlook good reasons. Of course, together with meeting other certain intrinsic conditions, like having free will or etc., but anyway. But still, none of this cites God, as I say here. It's a perfectly kosher explanation of the difference between human morality and animal behavior in terms of our inherent capacities as the kind of beings that we are. So honestly, I think this mistake is just utterly bizarre in my view, but... Oh, and by the way, Trent should also watch that full video, since therein I correct the oft-parroted claim that there can be no objective moral truths under atheism, which is a claim that Trent has at least made in the past. There are in fact dozens of perfectly coherent non-theistic theories of objective morality, and many apologists tend to be entirely unaware of their existence, let alone have substantive responses that haven't already been discussed by professional philosophers who defend these sorts of coherent non-theistic accounts of objective morality. Again, that video can be found in my Common Mistakes series playlist. But anyway, let's get back to Trent.
But you can hold humans morally responsible for their actions if human beings are not merely a collection of molecules. If God exists and we're made in God's image, that would explain how we have the ability to make choices that rise above what nature would ordinarily determine in purely physical outcomes.
So I have two responses here. First, this view may be quite difficult to fit with our best physical theories. On Trent's espoused view here, when an agent decides freely, she causes the decision without being causally determined to do so. But if the decision results in changes in her brain or in the rest of her body, she at some point would affect the physical world distinct from herself as an agent. However, on our best physical theories, the physical world is law-governed. So suppose first that the physical laws are causally deterministic. On the causal route to action that begins with an agent's decision, alterations in the physical world are produced, for example, in her brain or some other part of her body. But it would then seem that, under Trent's view, we would encounter divergences from the deterministic laws, because again, our behavior is not just in line with the fully deterministic processes going on in the physical world. The agent, as distinct from her physical brain, is affecting her physical brain and taking it in certain trajectories and making it behave in certain ways that can and do depart from what would be the ordinary deterministic law-governed physical unfolding of reality. But in that case, it would seem that Trent's view requires very precise miracles or divergences from the physical laws every single time someone makes a free decision. I mean, that seems facially implausible, firstly, but there's also strong inductive evidence against it from the fact that the applicability of these laws is universally and uniformly confirmed any time and anywhere that we test them. Just as it's antecedently incredibly unlikely that these laws would hold everywhere except one tiny patch in the outskirts of the Andromeda Galaxy, so too it seems antecedently incredibly unlikely that these laws would hold everywhere except one tiny patch of neurons in your prefrontal cortex. Now, one might object that it's possible that the physical alterations that result from free decisions just happen to dovetail with what could in principle be predicted on the basis of the deterministic laws, so nothing actually occurs that diverges from the relevant laws. But this proposal would involve coincidences too wild to be credible. Of course, one could hold that the laws of nature are indeterministic to avoid this, but not only are views on which physical indeterminism reigns pretty controversial, but it's exceedingly controversial that the indeterminism would be located in precisely the right ways so that it could percolate up to the level of neural networks in just the right way to allow for the agent to settle among alternative courses of decision or action, especially when nothing of this sort is known anywhere else in the world, which also leads to significant inductive evidence against this proposal. And as Peerboom and McKenna note in their book Free Will: A Contemporary Introduction, published with Routledge, wild coincidences still seem to arise on this proposal. Consider the class of possible human actions, each of which has a physical component whose antecedent probability of occurring is approximately 0.32, or 32%. It would not violate the statistical laws in the sense of being logically incompatible with them if, for a large number of instances, the physical components in this class were not in fact realized close to 32% of the time. Instead, the import of the statistical laws is that for a large number of instances, we can expect physical components in this class to be realized close to 32% of the time. But if agent-caused free action were compatible with what, according to the statistical law, is highly likely, then for a large enough number of instances, the possible actions in our class would have to be freely chosen close to 32% of the time. Then, for a sufficiently large number of instances, the possible actions whose physical components have an antecedent probability of 0.32 would almost certainly be freely chosen close to 32% of the time. However, if the occurrence of these physical components were settled by the decisions of libertarianly free agents, their actually being chosen, very close to 32% of the time, would result in a wildly improbable coincidence of cosmic proportions. The suggestion that libertarianly free choices would not diverge from what the statistical laws predict for the physical components of our actions runs so sharply counter to what we should expect as to render it incredible. Of course, much more could be said, both for and against these points. The arguments given above are themselves pretty controversial. My point is just that Trent is here offering an inference to the best explanation. According to Trent, God endowing us with the abilities to do otherwise that, quote-unquote, rise above the physical goings-on in our bodies, is the best explanation of our having those abilities. But, as the problems above show, this is very far from clear, and this explanation faces various deep explanatory challenges and puzzles, and inductive evidence against it. And to make matters even worse for Trent, theism may actually preclude our ability to do otherwise. And given Trent's own reasoning, this actually means that it's theists that can't blame atheists. Now, there are at least two ways that one might argue for this. One focuses on divine causation of everything apart from God, or perhaps instead focuses on divine decrees. And another focuses on divine foreknowledge. I'll here focus on the latter and offer you guys perhaps the strongest formulation of the conflict between divine foreknowledge and human leeway freedom. Does the argument succeed? That's a question that we can ask. Well, I will leave that up to you to determine. You can let me know in the comments. So again, here I'm just presenting perhaps the strongest formulation of the conflict between divine foreknowledge and human leeway freedom. There are ways that one could respond to this, and there are also counter-responses to those responses, and counter-counter-responses, and counter-counter-counter-responses, and so on. And I'm not going to delve into all that here, so I'm going to leave it up to you whether or not you think this succeeds. My goal here is just to at least make you guys aware of it, and that if the argument succeeds, and indeed it seems at least prima facie reasonable, well then theism actually precludes our ability to do otherwise, and hence, given Trent's own reasoning, that would mean that theists can't blame atheists. Premise 1 is that if God exists, then God has infallible, comprehensive foreknowledge. In other words, if God exists, then God knows exactly what's going to happen in advance of its happening, and he can't be mistaken in his beliefs about what's going to happen. This is an incredibly plausible premise. After all, God is supposed to be perfect, and a perfect being would surely not be ignorant about the future. Moreover, if God doesn't know certain aspects of the future, such as the future choices of creatures with leeway freedom, then absurdly, we can know things that God doesn't know, since we sometimes know how we will act, even while enjoying leeway freedom. Now on to a second premise. If God has infallible comprehensive foreknowledge, then God believed long before I existed that I will raise my hand at some time t. Crucially though, and this is premise 3, I'm powerless to prevent the fact that God believed long before I existed that I will raise my hand at t. This just follows from the extremely plausible idea that the past is fixed. It's out of our control, in that there's nothing one can do now such that, were we to do it, the past would have been different. In other words, we're currently powerless to prevent the past from happening the way it did. As the old saying goes, there's no use crying over spilled milk, since once it's spilled, we're powerless to prevent that past occurrence. Likewise, I'm powerless to prevent God from having that belief long before I was born. It's over and done with, and I can't prevent it any more than I can prevent yesterday's spilled milk from spilling. Moreover, and here's the fourth premise, that God believed long before I existed that I will raise my hand at t entails that I raise my hand at t. That's because God is infallible, and hence it's necessarily the case that, if God believes p, then p is true. In other words, God's believing p entails the truth of p. And then we add a fifth premise to the mix. If I'm powerless to prevent the fact that p, and p entails q, then I'm powerless to prevent the fact that q. This is quite plausible. After all, suppose I do have the power to prevent the fact that q, and suppose further that p entails q. Then, by contraposition, q's falsity entails p's falsity. So, since I have the power to bring it about that q is false, I also thereby have the power to bring it about that p is false, since q's falsity strictly entails p's falsity, and so by bringing about the former, I bring about the latter. So, if I have the power to prevent q, and if p entails q, then I have the power to prevent p. Consequently, if I don't have the power to prevent p, then, so long as p entails q, I also don't have the power to prevent q. And that is just premise 5 here. This premise is also just really plausible upon reflection on particular cases, but I won't dig into that here. And notice what happens when we put all these premises together. Premise 1 says that if God exists, then God has infallible comprehensive foreknowledge. Premise 2 says, if God has infallible comprehensive foreknowledge, then God believed long before I existed that I will raise my hand at some time t. And so what follows from those is that if God exists, then God believed long before I existed that I will raise my hand at some time t. But that proposition there, that God believed long before I existed that I will raise my hand at t, entails that I raise my hand at t. And moreover, I'm powerless to prevent the former proposition. But again, given our principle, if I'm powerless to prevent one proposition, then I'm powerless to prevent whatever is entailed by that proposition. And so, if indeed God exists, then I'm powerless to prevent any proposition entailed by God's belief long before I existed that I will raise my hand at some time t. And since the proposition that I raise my hand at t is itself entailed by that fact, and since I'm powerless to prevent that fact, it follows that if God exists, then I'm powerless to prevent the fact that I raise my hand at t. So yes, again, this is our intermediate conclusion 6. If God exists, then I'm powerless to prevent the fact that I raise my hand at t. We then add premise 7 to the mix. If I'm powerless to prevent the fact that I raise my hand at t, then I don't have leeway freedom with respect to raising my hand at t. This just follows from how we're understanding leeway freedom. If an agent has leeway freedom on a given occasion of acting, then it is within their power to prevent a particular course of action. They could, after all, simply take an alternative course of action. But since the choice of agent and action here were arbitrary, my argument generalizes to any human agent and any action. Thus we get premise 8. If I don't have leeway freedom with respect to my action of raising my hand at t, then no human has leeway freedom. And from 6 through 8, it follows that 9. If God exists, then no human has leeway freedom. And of course, Trent himself has been arguing that leeway freedom is required for moral responsibility, giving us this 10th premise. If no human has leeway freedom, then no human is ever morally responsible. It follows that if God exists, then no human is ever morally responsible. If this argument has teeth, then theists cannot consistently blame atheists. And so the tables have turned. This is a switcheroo against Trent. He's been bamboozled and confounded and debunked and intellectually discombobulated. I'm being facetious. Calm down, people. I'm having fun. Are you having fun? I hope you're having fun. My videos are fun. Please smash the like button. For every like the video gets, you increase my utility by 1 point. So if you're into maximizing utility, then you should smash the like button. Just like I smashed your mother. Okay. Now, there are, of course, other challenges to the libertarianism that Trent is espousing. For example, the luck objection. So, if we do indeed take Trent's libertarianism seriously, then it's going to have to be the case that when you freely choose, you could have done otherwise, even given all the causally antecedent facts leading up to your choice. And what that means is that whenever you choose, we can compare, there are going to be two different possible worlds, two different comprehensive ways that reality could be. And literally everything in the world is going to be exactly the same up until your moment of choice. All the causally antecedent factors, all your reasons, all your desires, every single state of you as an agent, all the states of the environment, all those are going to be exactly the same between these worlds up until the exact moment of choice. And then, seemingly magically, in one world, you choose A, and then in another world, you choose B. Despite the fact that literally everything was exactly the same leading up to those decisions. You didn't have a reason in one world that you didn't have in the other world. You didn't appreciate one reason more in one world that you appreciated less in the other world. There's nothing that you can point to in either of these worlds to explain why, for instance, you chose A in this world rather than B, right? Because again, in the world in which you chose B, literally all the causally antecedent factors are exactly the same in these worlds. There's literally nothing you can pinpoint to these worlds to explain the difference in the action. But if that's the case, I don't know, it starts to look like whether or not A is the choice that comes about as opposed to B being the choice that comes about is kind of like a matter of luck. And that seems kind of antithetical to control and moral responsibility. I mean, seriously, try to reflect on this. One of these agents found themselves in the choosing A world, and another one found themselves in the choosing B world. I mean, again, there's literally nothing that you can point to across these agents that could explain why they got B rather than A. Even if you cite certain reasons that favored them choosing B, or certain desires that they had for B, those reasons and desires are present in the other world in which they chose A. They're present to the exact same strength. They affected the agent's deliberation in exactly the same way in the other world. The agent appreciated them in exactly the same way. Literally the only difference between these worlds is the choice. When you really reflect on this, it starts to seem like just a matter of luck that we got the A world as opposed to the B world. And a lot of people have argued that undermines control or responsibility. So again, I'm fully explicit that argument too is exceedingly controversial, and there are various ways that one can push back against it. And I'm definitely not certain that it succeeds. My point is just that these are challenges to Trent's libertarianism. You can see that there's at least some prima facie plausibility to them, or at least I hope you can see why some other people, or even if you don't see that prima facie plausibility, I'm hoping you can at least see how some other people might find them at least prima facie plausible. In order for Trent's case to be ultimately convincing, he would have to dispel these objections, and yet he does no such thing. Oh, what's this? It's a GIF. It says, all my love for you, and this is you, and I'm just dumping out all my love on you. And this is, of course, directed to patrons or possible patrons. Yeah, that's right. If you're not a patron, you do indeed have the alternative possibility of becoming a patron. Patrons, by the way, have access to this document, which is over 6.2 thousand words long, and many other exclusive goodies, including early access to the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy entry on ontological arguments that I co-authored with Graham Oppie and Josh Rasmussen. It's not out in public yet, but it is available to my patrons. And there's also an unpublished supplement on symmetry breakers in there, and I'm going to make a future video on that, but you already have access to that entire detailed, juicy supplement. There are lots of other exclusive goodies ranging from videos and papers and other sorts of things. So please consider becoming a patron. So much love to my existing patrons, and thank you so much. As I say here, much, much love. Links to all that are in the description. Now back to the Council of Trent.
We are able to choose good or evil in a given situation. And if we choose evil, we can be held blameworthy for our choices because we had the power to choose good instead. We could have done otherwise. And that only makes sense on theism or belief in God, not atheism. Once again, here's the argument. If God does not exist, we do not have moral responsibility. We do have moral responsibility, therefore, God does exist.
And once again, as I say, not only is premise 1 criminally underjustified, but it's also false for some of the reasons that I've canvassed.
This is a logically valid argument, so the only way to refute it is to go after one of the premises. And atheists are divided on which premise to go after because atheists are divided over this question: can we have free will if everything is determined? If you say no, you are an incompatibilist. Free will and determinism are incompatible. You cannot have both. Many Christians would say that since we do have free will, that means determinism is false, because you can't have both. We are not slaves of fate. The universe is not some giant Rube Goldberg machine that determines only one set of actions will ever take place. However, many atheists would say that since the world is determined, then that just means we do not have free will. Where Christians give up determinism to solve the incompatibility, these atheists give up free will. And for many of them, this involves giving up moral responsibility. So they would reject premise 2, where we do have moral responsibility. But for most people, the existence of moral responsibility is as obvious as the existence of the external world, even though we could, in theory, be living in something like the Matrix. Also, if moral responsibility does not exist, the state would be justified in punishing innocent people, like relatives of criminals, as long as this could be proven to reduce crime.
What? How does that follow, Trent? Okay, listen. He has said, if moral responsibility does not exist, the state would be justified in punishing innocent people as long as this would be proven to reduce crime. That does not follow. That does not follow. What is going on here? Okay, anyway, let me calm down. I take it that Trent's reasoning is roughly that retributive punishment requires basic moral desert for its justification, which in turn requires moral responsibility. So, if there's no moral responsibility, then there's no basic desert. That is, no one deserves punishment simply because of what they've done, simply because of their wrongdoing, and hence retributive punishment is unjustified. But it doesn't follow that non-retributive, forward-looking, or consequentialist punishment is thereby justified. Maybe punishment simply isn't justified at all. If no one is morally responsible, it could easily be the case in principle that both retributive and non-retributive punishment are unjustified. So Trent is just wrong that it follows from the lack of moral responsibility that the state would be justified in punishing innocent people, as a form of forward-looking or consequentialist or non-retributive punishment. After all, the moral responsibility skeptic can simply opt for one of the approaches to crime that don't involve punishment in any usual sense, but instead involve putting the criminal in a quarantine, which, by the way, we already do to people who pose health hazards to society, even though they aren't responsible for their condition, and also trying to rehabilitate the criminals and reintegrate them into society. These sorts of approaches to crime can be implemented in ways that don't involve punishment in any usual sense of the term. But also, even if punishment isn't justified retributively, that is, even if punishment isn't justified on the basis of people deserving punishment, simply because they performed some wrongdoing for which they're morally responsible, that doesn't mean we have to adopt full-blown consequentialist justifications of punishment without any deontological constraints. Maybe punishment is justified by the forward-looking consideration of crime reduction, so think here of deterrence, incapacitation of the criminal, rehabilitation of the criminal, etc., but that there are nevertheless certain constraints on the permissible application of this forward-looking consequentialist consideration. And maybe one such constraint is that only the criminal, that is, only the one who is causally but not morally responsible, can be permissibly punished. Again, Trent would need to rule this out in order to justify his claim here. But he has completely failed to rule this out, and hence he has failed to justify his claim.
In fact, North Korea already does that through its 3 generations policy that punishes the children and grandchildren of criminals.
So, I personally find this repulsive, and I think you probably should too, but it's worth noting that God is depicted as enacting, sanctioning, or approving precisely this kind of collective and familial punishment throughout the Old Testament. It's a recurrent theme therein. Consider God approving of Achan's family, including young ones, being killed for his sin, or God drowning innocent babies in his punishment implemented by means of a worldwide or even local flood, or God commanding the Israelites to slaughter even the babies of neighboring tribes, for example as judgment on Canaanites, or God killing innocent firstborn Egyptian children, etc., etc., etc. So if you, like me, find the actions of North Korea described here repulsive, and as I think Trent is at least seeming to suggest that he does as well, then we should equally find the God of the Old Testament repulsive as well, and that applies to Trent too. Oh, I'm not saying that Trent is repulsive. I'm saying Trent should also think that if he thinks that about the North Korea. Okay, that was an important clarification, wasn't it?
If you say it is unjust or unfair to do this, then you must admit that moral responsibility exists, that people can choose to do or not do blameworthy acts, and that is what determines if someone deserves to be punished or not. But then we have to add something else that explains why human beings are not determined while other material beings in the universe are determined. Under the Christian view, being made in God's image would make the crucial difference. God, being all-powerful, can give us the power to be true, free causes in the world.
So what I said above addresses his points here, so let's move on to his consideration of compatibilism.
The other way to attack the argument would be to go after premise 1 and say that it's possible to have moral responsibility even if God does not exist. One way to do that would be to say free will and determinism are compatible. Even if we are determined to act in a godless universe by physical forces, we are still free to act in accord with our desires.
So I do want to make an important note about the graph that Trent was just displaying on screen. Compatibilists are committed neither to the existence of free will nor the truth of determinism. So it's kind of misleading for Trent to write yes next to both of them underneath the compatibilist side of the kind of graph. But maybe Trent is just noting one class of compatibilists that his arguments will be aimed at. I don't know. If so, he should be saying this so as not to confuse his audience. This whole free will debate in the popular sphere is already so fraught with confusion, so particular care and attention need to be paid to these things. And that's what you get with the Majesty of Reason experience. It's like the atheist experience, except when you call in, I don't scream at you the whole time and then angrily hang up.
Under compatibilism, a person is morally blameworthy simply because he wanted to burn down the house, even though he understood all the reasons for why he should not want to do that.
Okay, again, you can be a compatibilist and deny the existence of free will / moral responsibility. So Trent should not be treating compatibilism as saying that we're morally responsible. Also, Trent is here only articulating a single, unsophisticated, desire-based compatibilist theory of free will in the broad sense. That's not compatibilism, and compatibilists should not be characterized as being committed to it, as Trent misleadingly does. There are many more compatibilist theories of free will. See, for example, Peerboom and McKenna's Routledge Intro to Free Will, or the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy entry on compatibilism.
A compatibilist says free will just means you have the freedom to do what you want. No one forces you to do something against your will. Free will has nothing to do with the ability to have done other than what you did.
Okay, so Trent has here said that a compatibilist says that free will has nothing to do with the ability to have done otherwise than what you did. What? Trent, please stop misrepresenting the free will literature, albeit unintentionally. I'm not saying Trent is intentionally misrepresenting things, but he is misrepresenting them. He is mischaracterizing them, albeit unintentionally. There is such a thing as leeway compatibilism, which is the view, roughly, that 1. Leeway freedom is required for free will in the broad sense, and 2. Free will in the broad sense and leeway freedom are compatible with determinism. Leeway compatibilists are compatibilists who explicitly think that free will has everything to do with the ability to have done other than what we in fact do. So Trent, again, is just mistaken. These leeway compatibilists think that free will is compatible with determinism, so they're compatibilists. And they think that leeway freedom is required for free will in the broad sense. And of course, they also think that leeway freedom is compatible with determinism. In fact, we already saw one example of a leeway compatibilist earlier in this video, namely Kadri Vivalin.
But compatibilism is unsatisfying because why should we care about someone's wants or understanding of reasons if those two are also determined?
Okay, so Trent has here said that compatibilism is unsatisfying because why should we care about someone's wants or understanding of reasons if those two are also determined? Where is the argument here? What's the argument? Trent, you are the one who is trying to convince us of the falsity of compatibilism. It's not enough to just shift the burden of proof and ask, well, why should we care about these features if they're determined? The burden is on you to show that we cannot be free if we're determined. Merely asking why we should care about them if we're determined falls hopelessly short of meeting that burden.
If you drug a person, he may want to commit acts of violence, but that doesn't mean he is morally blameworthy in the same way as someone else who simply wants to commit acts of violence, even though in both cases the wants are caused by other factors outside of his control. It seems that being able to have done otherwise, to make a different choice than what actually happened, is what makes our actions blameworthy or praiseworthy.
But why? Why is that the case? I personally don't share that seeming, and again, compatibilists can agree that we have leeway freedom, and that leeway freedom is required for free will in the broad sense, and so required for moral responsibility.
If we are the primary reason an action happened, then the primary praise or blame for the action falls on our shoulder.
So I don't know what being the primary reason means in this context. If it means that without you or your decision, the action would not have occurred, then this is satisfied under compatibilist accounts of free will. They agree that you're a causal difference maker. That is, that without you or your decision as the cause of the action would not have occurred.
And the only way we can rise above the physical order to be that kind of primary cause is if an all-powerful, morally perfect God gives us the power to do that.
Okay, so I just said here, what? Why can't evolutionary processes, or neural systems, or any number of non-God things, like Brahman, or the Tao, or the universal wave function, or any number of things, have the power to generate irreducible top-down powers involved in free agency? Trent just flatly asserts that only God could provide this power. Trent, bare assertions won't cut it. You need to justify these outlandish claims.
Put in a more formal way, the argument would go like this. If atheism is true, then determinism is true. If determinism is true, there are no alternate possibilities. If there are no alternate possibilities, there is no moral responsibility. Therefore, if atheism is true, there is no moral responsibility. But there is moral responsibility. So determinism is false. And so atheism is false.
Okay, so you've got a first premise here. If atheism is true, then determinism is true. What? Since when is the atheist prevented from accepting, say, the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics, which rejects determinism? Since when is the atheist prevented from accepting irreducible top-down causal powers of certain biological systems whose behavior isn't fully determined by their microchemical makeup? What is going on in this first premise? This first premise is such a wild ride. If atheism is true, then determinism is true. That is, I mean, what can I say? What can I say that is nice? I mean, this is just silly. I'm just saying it. It's just silly. And we're moving on. Premise 2. If determinism is true, there are no alternative possibilities. Why? Why think that? I mean, sure, given the initial conditions in the laws, there's only one physically possible unfolding of reality. But most compatibilists will think that the initial conditions and laws could have been different, which allows for alternative possibilities. Also, what plausibly matters for leeway freedom is the ability to do otherwise. And things might have abilities to do or be otherwise, even if it is not possible, given the paths and the laws, that they be otherwise. For instance, a glass vase that is never broken in a deterministic world is still intuitively able to break. Also, there have been some really fascinating and prima facie forceful challenges to the idea that abilities imply corresponding possibilities. These challenges motivate the idea that one can have the ability to do otherwise, even if it is not metaphysically possible to do otherwise. MIT philosopher Jack Spencer has a brilliant paper in Mind wherein he makes the case for precisely this. It's called Able to Do the Impossible. You can find this by searching Able to Do the Impossible online by Jack Spencer, and you'll be able to find it. Let's look at Trent's third premise. If there are no alternative possibilities, there is no moral responsibility. Well, as I've explained, Trent has given us no good reason to think that this premise is true. And there are also potential positive reasons to think that it's false, namely Frankfurt cases, which we're about to get to in Trent's video, And in fact, Christians may have good reason to doubt this premise. After all, given God's moral perfection, God could not have done anything wrong. He must always do what's right. But it seems like God is praiseworthy for never doing wrong and always doing right. So here, there are no alternative possibilities, but there is moral responsibility. Or at least, so it seems. Likewise, it also seems that Jesus could not have done wrong and must have done what's right. Yet it seems like Jesus is nevertheless praiseworthy and responsible for never doing wrong and always doing right. So there is some pressure for Christians to reject this third premise. And let's move on now to the discussion of Frankfurt cases and Trent's adoption of the flickers of freedom response.
Now, some critics say we do have moral responsibility even if we could not have done otherwise, or even if it were impossible for us to make a different choice than we already made. And so this shows being able to do otherwise has nothing to do with moral responsibility. These critics often appeal to something that are called Frankfurt counterexamples, named after the philosopher Harry Frankfurt. Here's a version of these counterexamples. Imagine Smith goes into a voting booth and votes for Biden or Trump in an election, 2020, 2024. It doesn't matter because it's all the same and terrible now. Many people will say Smith is morally responsible for who he votes for because he could have voted for the other candidate. But imagine a villain named Frank has put a bomb in Smith's head that can read his thoughts. Frank wants Smith to vote for Trump. If Smith chooses to vote Trump, he gets to keep his head, the bomb doesn't go off. But if Smith steps into the voting booth and he decides to pull the lever for Biden, the bomb explodes right as he makes that decision, killing him instantly. The Frankfurt counterexample is supposed to show that Smith could not have done otherwise. Smith never could have voted for Biden, because if he did do that, his head would have exploded. And yet, if Smith votes for Trump, Smith is still morally responsible for his actions, even though voting for Biden is impossible under this situation. What matters isn't that he could have made a different choice. What matters is that he had certain reasons or motivations for the choice he did make. And that's what we should be judging. And you don't need God to evaluate reasons and motives in what a person does. So you can have moral responsibility without God. And by the way, if you find the thought experiment insensitive or offensive to your political sensibilities, just switch the candidates or put something else in there like Kang and Kronos, for example, from The Simpsons. Now, I'm not persuaded by the Frankfurt counterexample. You can still be praised for starting to do the right thing, even if it was impossible to carry out the right thing to completion. Imagine man is on a spaceship that is about to explode, and he can choose two buttons to press. One will safely teleport him to safety, leaving the rest of the crew to die, while the other button will safely teleport the rest of the crew to safety, leaving him to die. Unbeknownst to the man, the button to save him is broken, and pressing it just activates the other button instead. So in this case, the man cannot do otherwise. He will end up saving the crew and dooming himself. But clearly his decision about which button to press is where the moral praise comes into play, even if each decision, each button that you press leads to the same outcome. And the same is true in the voting case. The praise and blame is not about which lever ultimately gets pulled, but it's related to the decision Smith makes about which lever to pull. And that blameworthy or praiseworthy decision happens before the bomb explodes and reveals his use of his free will.
Editing Joe here. So I just noticed that the way that Trent constructs the Frankfurt case is basically such that the nefarious neuroscientist allows for the relevant agent to make a choice. And in making the choice, the person does indeed have alternative decisions that they can make. They could decide to choose, or decide to vote for A, or they could decide to vote for B. And it is only upon making the decision that the nefarious neuroscientist recognizes the decision that they make, and then basically prevents them from going through on it and acting on it. So basically the nefarious neuroscientist is allowing the agent to make the choice to vote for one of the candidates, but is basically going to intervene and prevent them from, for one of the candidates, is going to intervene and prevent them, if they choose to vote for that candidate, is going to prevent them from actually going through and actually voting for them. So in Trent's rendition of this particular Frankfurt case, the agent couldn't do otherwise, but they could choose otherwise. And that's where Trent is locating the moral responsibility here. Now, one thing to say is that it still seems very plausible that the agent is responsible for actually doing what they did, for voting as they did, and there's no leeway with respect to that. Trent is granting that the person could not have done otherwise. Of course, they could have chosen otherwise, but they could not have done otherwise. And so this would still challenge the claim that being able to do otherwise is required for moral responsibility. But that is a minor side point. But the main point that I want to bring up here is that this is not how some of the most sophisticated versions of Frankfurt cases go. In more sophisticated versions, the nefarious neuroscientist, it basically monitors the deliberation that Jones goes through and basically monitors the various signs going on in their body. Maybe somehow this nefarious neuroscientist is like telepathic, so it can also understand directly the thoughts that's going through Jones's mind. And when it becomes clear to the nefarious neuroscientist, even before the person makes the relevant decision to vote for one of the candidates, when it becomes clear to the neuroscientist which choice or which decision they're going to make, it's then that the nefarious neuroscientist plans to intervene if the person is going to decide to vote for the unfavored candidate, for the candidate that the nefarious neuroscientist does not favor. So in at least some more sophisticated versions of Frankfurt cases, they take a totally different structure than the structure that Trent is here expounding. And these more sophisticated Frankfurt cases render Trent's response to the less sophisticated case totally inapplicable. Because again, Trent's response was predicated on the fact that the nefarious neuroscientist is only planning to intervene after the person who's voting makes the relevant decision or choice. And if you set up the case like that, well then maybe, yeah, there is going to be some leeway, at least with respect to the choice or the decision. But again, in more sophisticated versions of Frankfurt cases, you can get rid of even that kind of leeway. And so Trent's response is not going to be able to go through on those renditions of the case. And so Trent is left without a good response to Frankfurt cases. Now, of course, there are more sophisticated ways to develop the flickers of freedom response that do indeed at least seek to address these more sophisticated versions of Frankfurt cases. But these are going to be susceptible to the response to the flickers of freedom rejoinder that I'm about to play in a second, that comes from Dr. Taylor Sear and some of his published work. So actually, let's get back to Trent, and I'll let Trent finish his video, and then I will play that little bit from Taylor Sear. So yeah, that's editing, Joe, here with my editing computer. Wow, look at that, iMovie. Wow.
The machine Frank puts in Smith's head must have some kind of delay. It can't simply know the future. There instead has to be an instant where Smith freely chooses to vote for someone, and then the machine acts and kills him after he decides, but before he pulls the lever in the voting booth. The philosopher John Martin Fisher calls this the flicker of freedom response to the Frankfurt examples. No matter how you construct the Frankfurt examples, there's always a tiny example, a flicker of free choice that can be the subject of moral blame or moral praise. This shows that moral responsibility is still intimately connected to the ability to do otherwise, and the ability to do otherwise cannot exist in a deterministic universe. Instead, our universe must contain something, or our universe must be subject to something, to be more correct. It must be subject to something that makes moral agents like human beings capable of rising above the laws of nature in order to participate in a natural law, a transcendent moral law, where they can choose between good and evil. Something like God, who is omnipotent and perfect goodness itself.
Okay, so listen, I think the flickers of freedom response is quite reasonable, but I'm not sure I'm ultimately convinced by it. And there are indeed some reasonable pushbacks to the flickers of freedom response. And in fact, I'm going to play one of the central pushbacks from Dr. Taylor Sear that he's published on in several papers of his, but I also had him on my channel, and we discussed his response to the flickers of freedom at this timestamp in this video. So I'm going to play that now in response to Trent's adoption of the flickers of freedom response. I do want to cover, at least here, one of the most prominent objections to it, because I know you have published interesting and like some pretty forceful stuff in response to this objection. So it's like the flicker of freedom response. So I think the basic idea here is that, well, we need to be very careful about what we're saying the agent is responsible for. And again, this is a response on behalf of the incompatibilist. They were basically saying, well, the agent is indeed responsible for choosing on their own to act as they did, and they did have leeway with respect to that. They could have chosen on their own, or they could have, it's hard to say the alternative, omitted to choose on their own, maybe, and the the counterfactual intervener could have came in and made them not choose on their own or whatever. So like the person did indeed have an alternative possibility open to them, and so it's not the case to say that they didn't have leeway, and so we don't have a counterexample to the view that leeway is required for moral responsibility. Anyway, you can set up the flicker of freedom thing maybe better than I can, but I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah. I mean, you set it up very well. The basic idea is just that, like, well, even in the Frankfurt case, there are two ways things could go. Either the agent could choose to A, on their own, as actually happened. But there's this alternative where the agent doesn't do that. They don't choose to A on their own. They do it because the counterfactual intervener, the neuroscientist, pressed the button and made them do it. And so the flicker of freedom theorist who wants to defend alternative possibilities, that conception of moral responsibility, says, well, that's enough for the agent to count as morally responsible and having alternatives in a Frankfurt case. And so Frankfurt cases aren't successful kind of counterexamples to PAP. To make it seem like that alternative possibility is a relevant one, I've argued, others have argued, including John Myron Fisher has argued, that the alternative possibility has to be robust, in the sense that it has to be an alternative where the agent is responsible for going that way rather than the other. Otherwise, it looks like it can't play the right kind of role in grounding the agent's freedom in the actual sequence, right? It can't explain why they were free in terms of having alternative possibilities if, the alternative was just a sort of fluke. It wasn't something that was up to them. It wasn't something they were free and responsible for choosing. So, and you already mentioned this, Joe, some flicker theorists like Justin Capes and Philip Swenson argue that the agent's alternative is robust in a Frankfurt case, because whether they decide on their own or whether they omit to decide on their own is up to them. That is something that they're free and responsible for. And so in some of my work, I think this is one of the places where it gets very, very subtle. But this is one of the places where I think there is room for further debate, and it is happening. I don't think that the agent's omission to choose to A on their own, I don't think that that's something that they're responsible for in the alternative sequence or something that they do freely. And so I don't think that that's a robust alternative. And so I think there's still, the flicker theorist owes us a story of how that could be a robust alternative.
Is that because they don't meet certain epistemic conditions, or what? Why is that?
Yeah, I think the main thing, this is the thing I'm most kind of compelled by, is that they don't meet the epistemic condition on responsibility, if that's a distinct condition from the sort of freedom condition on responsibility. The agent in a Frankfurt case is not aware of the neuroscientist at all, or the fact that they have the chip in their brain, right? This is very advanced technology, right? That they don't even have any kind of headache or anything from this surgery that they've recently had. They are not thinking, oh, either I'm going to, choose to A on my own, or, this guy's going to press a button and make me do it. And so I'm not going to do it on my own. I'm going to make him force me to do it. That's not how the agent's thinking of it, right? All they're thinking is, should I do it, or should I choose to A, or should I choose to B? It turns out choosing to B is not a genuine alternative for them. It's not metaphysically open. It is an epistemic alternative. And so they're weighing the, choice to A and choice to B. But when they choose to A, on their own, they're not thinking about this neuroscientist at all. And so the omission to choose to A on their own does not meet the typical conditions on responsibility, even for omissions. In typical cases of omissions, like when, some horrible person, I'm not going to put myself in this scenario, but some horrible person sees a child drowning in, a shallow pond and omits to jump in and save the child, right? They're aware of what's going on, of the alternatives, and they're, at least the epistemic alternatives, and they're making a decision in light of those. That's not what's happening in a Frankfurt case. The agent is not aware of the genuinely open alternative, if there is one.
So the point here is that if Trent wants to adequately respond to Frankfurt cases, then he needs to respond to these challenges to the flickers of freedom response. But there we go. There we have it. Why Trent Horn is mistaken that atheists cannot blame Christians, and also some reasons for thinking that Christians and theists can't blame atheists. So let me know what you think about all this stuff down there in the comments section. I'd like to end this by directing you guys to some excellent resources on free will and all these sorts of debates. Definitely check out The Free Will Show by Taylor Sear and Matthew Flummer. They're actually having a book about the Free Will Show coming out, I think with Oxford University Press sometime soon, so stay on the lookout for that. Definitely also check out my Free Will playlist. Check out Dirk Peerboom and Michael McKenna's excellent book, Free Will, A Contemporary Introduction, published with Routledge. In fact, I've got it right next to me. Here it is. If you can look at the screen, it's right here. Oh, right. Check out Robert Kane's book, A Contemporary Introduction to Free Will. I wrote Contemporart. A Contemporart Introduction to Free Will. And finally, check out the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy and Internet Encyclopedia of Philosophy. They've got lots of different articles on free will, compatibilism, presumably libertarianism, lots of other things. Those are always amazing resources. So check those out if you are interested. And of course, that brings us to the end of this video. So if you see value in the work that I do, please consider supporting me on Patreon or making a one-time donation. Think of that as like me putting my hat out at the end of a performance, right? And it's basically like a tip. Hey, listen, you tip waiters, don't you? And waiters are just like bringing you extra breadsticks, and they're already getting paid for what they're doing. I'm not already getting paid for what I'm doing. And I'm not just bringing you breadsticks, I'm helping you think critically and cautiously and carefully and lovingly about the fundamental nature of reality and our place in it. I think there's a disparity in the importance here. That's my case for you giving me a tip, because I'm a grifter, certified grifter. I should get a t-shirt that says certified grifter. Any amount helps. It helps me through grad school. It helps motivate me because it helps show me that people are indeed seeing value in the work that I do. And it's also helping me pay off my student debt from undergrad. It really is. Thanks in advance for all that. And of course, turn on that little bell so you get notified when my videos come out, because of course, who wouldn't want to be notified when these videos, these epic, amazing, beautiful, brilliant videos, they're so good, believe me, folks, who wouldn't want to be notified when they come out? And of course, what better way to end is there than, I'm Joe Schmid, this is The Majesty of Reason, and peace out.